guys, it's me, Crystal, and welcome to another Top 5 Wednesday. So basically what this is you have a prompt, and then you pick 5 books that go with the prompt, and then you talk about them. So Top 5 Wednesday is a Goodreads group, and I will link the group in the description box below in case you want to check them out. So this week's prompt is movie adaptations, which is pretty self-explanatory, but I'm going to read the little description that comes along with it anyway. And so it says, sometimes books are turned into movies, sometimes the movies are great, and other times they are terrible. This week, let's look at some books that were made into movies and see if the movies were better or worse than the original book. So I'm going to apologize in advance for how vampire heavy this is. I'm sure I've mentioned several times at this point that I was quite the big vampire fan back in the day, and I remain a vampire fan to this day to a lesser degree. And I was originally going to talk about another book first, but then I realized I had recently talked about that book in a tag earlier this year, and I was like, let's not talk about that book again so soon. Let's talk about something else. So the first book I'm going to talk about is Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. And in this case, I feel like the book is good and the movie is good, but they're both flawed in some way. But I do like the movie better than I like the book. And mainly that's because when I'm watching the movie, I don't have to suffer through like these long descriptions of people's clothes like I do in the book. It's like I've seen the movie several times. At this point, I've seen it several times adapted for television, like when I was younger. And then I've seen it several times like in the full movie. And every time I watch that movie, at the end of the movie, like you see Lestat pulling like these dirty lace sleeves out of like his jacket or whatever. And every time I see them, I'm like, oh my gosh, Lestat and his stupid lacy sleeves, because there's a scene in this book where Anne Rice goes on and on and on about what Lestat is wearing, and originally I tried to skip it, but then I was like completely lost, and I was like, oh my gosh, where are we and how did we get here? So I realized I had to suffer through all this description, because weaved into that was like some relevant information about the plot. I don't ever want to read this book again, but I still keep it because reasons. But I will say, I like the ending of the book a little bit better than the ending to the movie. Like, I thought the ending to the movie was, like, super fun, but the ending to the book is actually, like, a little, like, creepy. So, like, the ending of the book gave me these vibes that it's like, oh my gosh, somebody's gonna get killed. But in the movie, they're like, oh my gosh, let's kill somebody. And so it was just more, I don't know, subtle, and then it had like this kind of dangerous like overtones and like this, I don't know, I just like the ending. I thought it was a really good fit, but I understand why they changed it in the movie, but I do like the ending to the book a little bit better. I also will say, like, the casting for the movie, the same thing kind of happened with Harry Potter, where like all the teachers, I guess because they wanted to use like bigger name actors for the adults, they were all too old for the roles that they were playing. And the same thing is happening with Interview with the Vampire. All the main characters like Claudia, Louis, Lestat, Armand, they're all too old. They're all way older in the movie than they are in the book. It doesn't bother me, again, probably because I saw the movie so many times before I read the book, but they are older. And even though I think the movie is really enjoyable, it is one of my more favorite vampire movies. I don't necessarily think it's better than the book. It's just like less annoying. And next, I'm going to talk about Vampire Academy by Raquel Mead. And in this case, I have to say the movie is far inferior to the book. Now, full disclosure, I did really like the movie. I thought it was really fun. But the book is more fun, and the book is just better in general. So I've seen the movie a couple of times. I just flat out refused to watch the movie when it first came out because it just looked like really campy and really silly. But I read a graphic novel version of Vampire Academy, and I was like, oh my gosh, that was so much fun. So then I watched the movie, and then I read the book, and then I watched the movie again. I don't think it was like a great movie. Like, it did capture like some of the like dark humor and like fun of the book, but I think they were just kind of suffering from like not the best casting for the characters. Like, I thought the casting for Rose was pretty good, and I thought the casting for Lissa, who's the vampire princess, I thought like she looked like Lissa, but like Lissa's actually kind of multifaceted character, and I don't think like she was really fully brought to life. Also, Dimitri, even though, okay, so like by the time I watched the movie for the second time, like I was like, I mean, I'm okay with it. Like I'm okay with the casting for Dimitri, but he does not look like Dimitri. He doesn't have Dimitri swag. He just doesn't. He just doesn't have it. And I feel like that's one of the reasons why the Vampire Academy movie just kind of fell flat is the casting. But I just think they just could have done a better job in general of just like bringing the story to life and like maybe giving it, you know, the attention that it deserves instead of just kind of phoning it in. So I just feel like, you know, like with Harry Potter and like with Twilight, like they were trying to make like a big blockbuster movie. Like they were trying to make something that was entertaining, that was visually appealing, and that had a decent pacing, at least if we're talking about the first 3 Twilight movies. And with this, it was kind of like, oh, this is popular. And it felt like they just kind of phoned it in. And so it's still fun, but I probably only like it so much because I like the story so much. And it's not one of those things that like Vampire Academy is not a good movie in general, but it's definitely not a good movie if you have not read the book. And if you have read the book, then it's a little disappointing. But anyway. So next I'm going to talk about Dracula. And I've read Dracula a couple of times, and I've watched, I think, 4 versions of Dracula that I can think of off the top of my head. I've seen the black and white Bela Lugosi Dracula, and I did not like it. It was super weird. And also, no one has followed this story exactly. I will say I think it's late 90s, or mid-90s, early 90s, whatever. The one with Gary Oldman and Winona Ryder, early 90s? Anyway, that Dracula, Keanu Reeves, they got the closest to the original story. If you're talking about like a faithful adaptation, that is the most faithful adaptation of the story. The Bela Lugosi Dracula, it's just super cheesy. But anyway, so Dracula, the one with Winona Ryder and Gary Oldman and Keanu Reeves, that is my favorite Dracula movie. I also saw Dracula 2000. I watch bad movies sometimes. I just like them. There's something charming about them. So I have a very high tolerance for bad movies, which is why I'm surprised I found the Bela Lugosi Dracula to be so bad. But Dracula 2000, okay, so a little bit of a spoiler, not a big spoiler, but a little bit of a spoiler. So they talked about how he becomes a vampire, and Dracula, and the Bela Lugosi Dracula, they don't address this at all. And then in the 90s Dracula, you know, basically he like curses himself or sells his soul to Satan or something. And becomes Dracula because he wants to get vengeance against his enemies or something, like, you know, it's a war. In Dracula 2000, he becomes a vampire because he hangs himself. He tries to hang himself and he doesn't die before the sun comes up, and that turns him into a vampire. And I'm like, what's the logic behind that? I mean, it's just really not good, but I watch anyway because it's fun. And then Dracula Untold. Now, I love Dracula Untold, but apparently I'm the only one because it never got a sequel, and that movie came out in 2014. But this is starring, what's his name? Luke Evans. And I thought he did like a really good job. And I thought they did a really good job in general. Like, I thought the visuals were stunning and the storyline actually made sense. And then, like, he becomes a vampire because he goes to this creepy guy in a cave on a mountain. And he's like, help me, you know, vanquish our enemies. And he gets turned into a vampire. Oh my gosh, it's so cool. But I thought they did like a really good job of like showing, you know, the human side of Dracula. Like, I did a research paper in college. It was on Vlad the Impaler. So I thought they did a really good job like capturing, you know, like the spirit of Vlad, maybe not quite his bloodthirstiness and his violence, and in the very violent ways. Real life Vlad would, you know, kill his enemies. Like, he was called Vlad the Impaler for a reason. He would impale people on these stakes and let gravity drag them to the ground. It's horrifying. But anyway. So I actually personally found Dracula a little hard to read, but it's very, I want to say, like, beautiful, like atmospheric, you know, dark story. And I really like the manga version because you get that atmosphere, but with like better pacing. But outside of the Bela Lugosi one, I have seen all the other Dracula adaptation movies that I mentioned like several times. But I will say, next time I want to read this story, I will probably just read the manga version again. But I do think it's a really good story, though. And I don't understand why people always add the same elements to Dracula when they adapt it to television. But I do think Dracula is worth reading, at least the manga version. And yeah. And because I just realized I forgot to mention it, Dracula was written by Bram Stoker, and I just realized that you can't see it because it is very lightly written right here. But anyway, Dracula is by Bram Stoker. So next I'm going to talk about The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving, and I'm going to talk about the Johnny Depp Sleepy Hollow movie. So it was directed by Tim Burton and it also stars Christina Ricci, and I think the movie came out in 1999. So every time I watch a Sleepy Hollow movie, I watch it twice. And I don't know why. There's just something like just so haunting and like atmospheric and like gorgeous about the story and the way that it's like presented in that movie. I thought Johnny Depp made like the perfect Ichabod Crane. And every time I watch the movie, Christina Ricci has to grow on me, but she always does. And by the end of the movie, I'm just like totally invested. And if I go long enough without watching the movie, I tend to forget, like, you know, like the little details and everything. And so the actual story is about 34 pages in this copy that I have. And it's a little sad. Okay, so like Ichabod Crane is not treated very well in this story. Okay, maybe I just like Ichabod because I've seen, you know, the Tim Burton movie just way too many times. But I mean, like, yeah, he's a little bit of like a social climber, you know, he's a little bit of a gold digger or whatever. But it's like, can you blame him? Okay. And I just feel like he's treated badly, and it just makes me feel bad for him. And like, you don't really know what happens either at the end of the story, but I do think the story is, you know, it's a little atmospheric. It's not as atmospheric as the movie. I just feel like the movie took like the threads of atmosphere that are in the story and like the creepy factor, and it just like dialed it like way up. And it is just so visually stunning. But I did enjoy reading the story. I thought it had this kind of dark, like creepy, you know, atmosphere. I'm just one of those people that it's like sometimes when you leave things unexplained, like it's creepier. And sometimes when you leave them unexplained, like it's a little frustrating. And in this case, it was, you know, it was a little frustrating. So I did find this a little interesting, but I also found it like incredibly hard to read. And the part of that was like, they were just like really long, rambling, the kind of sentences. There were also like a lot of like unnecessary description, and it wasn't like helping to like build the story. Like, it was just like, it just felt like it was just there because that's how people wrote back whenever this was written, you know? And then, like, you know, he would give you, like, these long backstories on all these characters that, like, never showed up again in the story. And I'm just like, I can't keep up with all of these people, but I guess this was interesting, again, back when it was written. I know I liked some of this story. I think like there were probably about a fourth of the story that I thought was like really interesting and fascinating and, you know, creepy and dark and had that atmosphere that I was looking for at the time I read this. I was writing a story that was like inspired by Sleepy Hollow. So I watched the movie 2 times in a row, of course, and then I wanted to read the story. And it did help, like the small town feel that this story has, like it did help with the notes that I was taking for the story. So I definitely liked the movie like a lot better than I liked the story, but I'm also happy that I have read the story because now I know like what the source material was for a movie that I apparently enjoy a great deal. So yeah. And like I said, part of the story was very interesting and creepy and atmospheric. So I do still like the story. It's just, I like the movie a lot more. And last, I'm going to talk about Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. And in this case, I will say that this movie adaptation for Catching Fire is literally my favorite book to movie adaptation ever. I thought they captured the pacing and the horror and the tension like perfectly. Okay, so this is my favorite book in the Hunger Games trilogy. However, I say that the first time I read these books, the only time I've read these books, is when I borrowed them from my sister. I borrowed the ebooks from my sister. And this book would have been thrown across the room, but I was reading it off my iPad and I didn't want to throw my iPad across the room. So I called my sister and I was inconsolable. I was screaming and I was like, I can't stand this. I do not read books to be upset. And if you've read this, then you probably know, or maybe you don't know at which point I got upset. But they were in the dome. They were in the dome. They were back in the dome. And oh my God, I was so upset. I was so upset. So I don't know. Maybe I was halfway through the book and I called my sister and I was like, you have to tell me if Peeta dies. I'm like, if Peeta dies, I'm not going to read this book. So full disclosure, I very much ship Katniss and Gale. Like, I have a huge crush, not had. I have a huge crush on Gale from the books. Okay? And I'm just like, I mean, I also like movie gal, but I also love Peeta, okay? I love Peeta so much. Again, love, not loved. I love Peeta. And I just wanted him to be okay. And I knew Katniss wasn't going to die because this is book 2. But, you know, I called my sister. I'm like, you have to tell me Peeta dies, because if he dies, I can't read this book. And I was just like I said, just completely inconsolable, almost in tears, like in a rage. Okay. And my sister's like, calm down. Where are you? And so I tell her where I am. And she's like, I'm not going to tell you what happens, but Peeta does not die in this book. And I was like, okay, so then I could finish it. And I ended up loving it. And this book has like one of the worst cliffhangers I've ever read in my life. But all the books were out when I read this, and I borrowed Mockingjay from her immediately, you know, and so I didn't have to wait even 24 hours to have Mockingjay in my hands. So I think that has a lot to do with why I love this so much. But oh my gosh, I thought they did the movie adaptation for this book was like perfect. And like when I was watching the theater, I was like, haha, like everybody's all tense and they don't know what happens, but I do because I read the book, you know. It was just so good. And it was like the perfect distraction, because the day I saw the movie was the day I saw the Red Wedding episode on Game of Thrones. And I was late watching it, like months late watching it. And so even though I had heard about the Red Wedding that summer, I didn't really know what happened. I just knew it was horrifying. But when it showed up, like by the time I watched it, I had like completely forgotten. And thank God I was watching in the middle of the day. I watched it and I was like, oh my God, I feel sick. Like it was the most horrible, like few moments on television that I'd ever seen in my life. Like in my life. And I'm like, I hate everything. I hate this show. I'm like, why did I watch this? Why am I watching this show? I should quit. But as soon as I finished watching that episode, it was time for me to leave and meet people at the theater to watch Catching Fire. And oh my gosh, I needed this. And I thought it was amazing. So in that case, the book and the movie are just equally like so tense and so amazing. Side note, Mockingjay Part One. So like, you know how like you get to the very end of Mockingjay and then they like cut to black and then they have like another like minute before the credits roll. I was telling my sister, I was like, I wish so much that when they cut to black, the credits rolled. Because I was like, don't you wish you read the book now? You should read the book so you know what happens. Because it would have been the perfect cliffhanger. But maybe that's just, you know, the mean side of me talking, wanting, you know, people to suffer. Not really, but, you know, it would have been hilarious. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And it's like, you should read the book. Anyway. So that's all for this video. I hope you guys are doing well. So what do you think? Like, have you seen any of these movies that I've talked about? Like, do you agree that they did an amazing job with this book? Because I think they did an amazing job. I mean, once I got over the casting for Peeta in the first movie, like, I like the actor, but I'm like, he doesn't look like Peeta, you know? But anyway, I still love him so much. But let me know your thoughts, if you have some, about the books I was talking about today. Or feel free to share your favorite book to movie adaptation, and I will see you guys on Monday. Bye.